Thank you. Ujjwala, is it time to get started?
Kitaji, just give it about 30 seconds and then you can begin.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there'll be a queue of people waiting to join and they'll all be logging.
Yeah.
Kitaji, please get started.
Okay. Thank you, Ujjwala, very much. And friends and colleagues, bhaiyo behno, welcome series on rethinking cities, largely rethinking Indian cities. This event is different from most that we have done, and as we are starting a whole new series on SWARAJ for cities, which will look at urban planning and governance beyond 74th amendment. Over the period of next few months, and as a matter of fact, Sandeep goes on making a commitment that over a period of next 1 year, we'll have a good number of webinars and meetings and seminars on this. And this is the launch of that particular series that we want to kind of work on. This is, in fact, the inaugural episode. And before we do anything, I must thank Sandeep personally, and first of all, was the founder of Conscious Communities for relentless efforts. If someone has made relentless efforts in putting this series together, it is Sandeep. And so Sandeep bhai, before going anywhere else, let me thank you. It's wonderful that you are here and that your effort and that your support will be available while we develop many more webinars. I also must thank the other partners who are helping plan, managing, and delivering this series. And this includes, this time we have 5 citizens agenda for Bangalore, Praja, which has been doing enormous amount of work on democracy and democratization processes. Civic Bangalore, a very old organization everyone knows about, and Making Model Gurgaon, and INHAF. So there are 5 partners who are arranging this webinar series. I'm not going to thank all the panelists because that's the work that Sandeep would do, but I must thank Dr. Raghunandan, founder, former IAS officer, who has written and is going to present the first position paper on the state of urban governance in India. Before this webinar takes off and before I hand this over to Sandeep, I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you all about this webinar series, which you're running for last 2 years almost. This is 90th webinar. And over the period of last few years, we have had more than 400 kind of participant panelists coming and sharing their views and perspectives and ideas. We also had discussions and debate on over 40 themes and sub-themes related to urban issues. So this has been going on for a long time. And I must tell you very briefly why we are doing this. What is the purpose? What we're trying to achieve. This seminar series on Rethinking City has 4 underlying assumptions. One, that despite being engines of economic growth and centers for culture, technology, knowledge, and global attention and investment, our cities are not in pink of health. Be that small or big cities, be that industrial or commercial cities, be that district town or state capital. Our cities are not in good health. And it's just about everything, be that environment or water or governance or planning or slums or housing or rivers, just about anything. Our cities are saddled with major challenges. This is the first important reason we started this one. The second one is this: the cities, as they are and the way they are growing and developing, do not look like meeting the challenge of unprecedented urbanization India is witnessing over the last decades. It neither looks like providing safe and healthy quality of living to 870 million people who will be there in our cities in 30 more years, almost doubling of the population that we have today in our cities. Nor does it look like delivering on 7 or 8% economic growth the country expects to get rid of its poverty and emerge as an economic superpower. So second reason is this, that it's not only we have problems, not only we have challenges, we do not look like prepared to meet those challenges adequately, both in terms of quality of life to people, as well as economic growth that cities must, I think, order. They are engines of economic growth. The third reason is this: the government effort, and government is trying, no one can deny that, alone is not adequate to ensure healthy, livable, productive, inclusive, and sustainable cities. The government alone will not be able to do it. And the fourth reason is the wider society, the human capital outside the government system has the required skill, knowledge, experience, and even motivation to contribute meaningfully in search for alternative approaches and new solutions. This webinar series is part of a wider national societal effort aimed to bringing in not only fresh ideas and new perspectives, but also new voices and new collectivism, new togetherness, new partnership, and new energy in meeting urban challenge. That is, in redefining the urban challenge and finding more effective ways to addressing it. It is taking the urban challenge to the people. It is preparing them to engage and contribute. It is making the urban development challenge a societal challenge, a people's challenge, along with that of the governments. As I say, 2 years since inception, we have tried to do a lot. The series has been conceived and presented by INHAF, which is Habitat Forum. It's a network of professional civil society actors and others engaged in habitat development related activities. It's also a partnership because there's a large number of people, individuals, and organizations have made contribution to bring about this particular webinar series. So that said, Let me complete in 1 more minute my last task, and that is to introduce Dr. Raghunandan, former IAS officers and decentralization expert, who's going to kind of do the keynote presentation today. Raghunandan Saab is a consultant, trainer, and author who specializes in decentralization, anti-corruption, and heritage conservation. He has served in the Indian Administrative Service, that is IAS, and held positions such as Secretary of the Rural Development and Panchayat Raj Department in Karnataka, that is during 2002 and 2004, and was Joint Secretary in the Ministry of Panchayat Raj in the Government of India during 2004-2009. Currently, he holds position as a Senior Visiting Fellow at the Center for Policy Research, New Delhi, and a visiting faculty at the Institute of Federalism. He has published numerous articles, research papers, and books, including, and that's very interesting, everything you wanted to know about bureaucracy, but were afraid to ask. And this has been produced by Random House, Penguin, 2019. So with this introduction and thanking all of you again, I hand this over to Sandeep to conduct today's webinar. Let me also tell you that as I said, that I'm trying to kind of hold on to as long as I can, but if I have to withdraw, kindly excuse me. As I said, I'm in Mumbai in an important function, but thank you very much. Sandeep.
Thank you, Kirtibhai. Thanks for the generous introduction. And I must also let all the participants and audience know that without Kirtibhai pushing us incessantly, we probably would not have launched right now. Just to briefly sum up how this initiative began, many of us activists who are engaging in urban governance and trying to improve things, I only started engaging with it about 5 years ago, and I came across the mention of the 74th Amendment, and I used to wonder why I'd never heard of it before. And even in the activist circles, 74th Amendment was rarely spoken about. And then I used to attend various programs, webinars, including the series by INHAF, which is Rethinking Cities, and a lot of those. And most of them dealing with governance challenges and planning challenges. And then I used to wonder why 74th Amendment was never taken as a framework for either addressing those issues or questioning them. And so then I kind of brought this up after a couple of webinars that I think it was INHAF webinars or World of Water by Dr. Hariharan, who's also a member of INHAF. And I casually spoke to him about saying that we should do a series on 74th Amendment, because at least that is kind of a cornerstone around which we can push for reform and governance in cities. And we dwelt on it. I think it was a year ago, 2021 or so. And then Dr. Hariharan got back to me in October of 2022, and he said, Kirtibhai is very excited about this idea and he wants us to do it. And then Kirtibhai and me had a very long discussion about it. Kirtibhai said he's very excited. I had only proposed about 4 webinars, and he said, no, nothing doing. And I actually wanted to do this only in Bangalore specific, because that's where I'm very familiar. Kirtibhai said, no, nothing doing. We have to expand this. It's a national issue. It's a national problem. And we have to expand the scope of this webinar to make it one of national importance. Also, we need to do much more than 4. He said you have to do at least 2 webinars a month, and we have to do about 24 in a year. And we said we'll try, we'll take up this challenge, but we just said that we'll try, and we have been attempting to put this together. But since most of us are so busy with so many other things, most of the activists especially have at least 10 to 15 commitments. So it was getting very difficult to focus on it, and it was due to incessant pushing, motivation, and chiding. I would say this shamelessly. I look up to Mr. Kirtibhai as an elder brother, and I take all of that very positively. So we put ourselves to delivering at least one a month, and finally we got going now. I'm happy to invite you all to this first inaugural event. This is going to be kind of a general panel discussion on the essential issues that we will explore over the next year. Also, we wanted to, through our various discussions, we came up with this idea of publications that will accompany these, the first of which is being presented today by Dr. Raghunandan. And we thank Mr. Raghunandan for having put in extremely high amount of work. Initially, he actually presented a paper of 100 papers, which was very substantial. And now he's actually reduced it to 25 pages, and also what I would call as dumbing down, so lay people like us can understand. Otherwise, it doesn't serve much purpose. So I thank Mr. Raghunandan for having spent so much effort on it. So without any more delay, I'd like to move into the presentation of the position paper by Mr. Raghunandan. Just one thing I'd like to tell you all is, since we've started now, our next event is actually a hybrid event, and we have already booked venue. It's on the 12th of August in Bangalore at Bangalore International Center. People who can visit Bangalore can attend the event. It's a full day event. It'll be largely a region-focused event, both on Bangalore and on South India. So that's going to be a larger event, and I invite all of you to attend that as well. Mr. Raghunandan, I hand over the stage to you. We'd love to hear your presentation on your position paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep. Hello to everybody who's attending this webinar. I thank Sandeep and Mr. Shah for giving me this opportunity to speak to all of you. There is a longish presentation paper. As Sandeep said, there is an even longer paper for those who are interested, because the longer paper contains much more detail of some of the sentences that I have written, because everything that I have written, I believe, is backed by a certain level of proof and evidence. So that is what I have kept out of this paper. Let me go quickly to the paper, because Sandeep, how long do I have? About 15 minutes, I think, according to the program.
Yes.
So in 15 minutes, let me go through the major points that I have made in the paper. I request all of you to please read the paper. There is a one-page abstract, but merely don't look at the abstract. There are a lot of details that I have written in it, and I think it is important for a complete understanding to see the paper. You may not agree with everything that I say, but I'd love to have an argument about it. Now, first of all, my paper makes for rather depressing reading, which is unusual, because I am not a depressing person and I am not a pessimist. But the situation as far as democratic decentralization is concerned in India is bad, and it is fading very fast. And I think this is part of the general decline of democracy in the country. But within the whole concept of decentralization, I think there's poorer understanding, and we as a people of India are actually being shepherded and manipulated into accepting the reality that there is no decentralization. Now, while I say this, I must qualify my statement by explaining what I believe is meant by the word decentralization, because the word decentralization can mean many things to many people, and sometimes that's a big problem about discussions on decentralization, because you could have an argument with somebody for an hour and then realize that he or she was thinking of something completely different when we spoke about the word decentralization. So let me try to unpack the word decentralization first. Now, typically speaking, and I'm really rushing through this conceptual kind of a framework, decentralization comprises of three forms. distilled, double distilled, that's ultimately what it is. You could deconcentrate, which is that a central authority can create branch offices, which are actually an inherent part of the central authority, but located in branches across the country. Or the centralized authority could delegate powers to an agent, and the agency performs the tasks that are delegated by the central authority. But the most radical and the most important form of decentralization is devolution, and devolution carries with it certain very strong and irreversible aspects as far as the compact between local and central. When you devolve powers to a local authority, it means that the local authority has not merely got powers, but has also got responsibilities, and furthermore is accountable downward to the people for the responsibilities that have been given. From a fiscal side, a devolution practice incorporates what is known as an intergovernmental fiscal transfer system, by which the local government gets a share of taxes, plus it has substantial taxation powers so that it can fund its own process. And finally, the personnel that the local government uses are hired and fired at the local level. This is what you mean when you go and look at a prefecture in France or a commune in Switzerland or any other country where democratic decentralization works. It is through a process of devolution. Devolution means autonomy. And here I am going to take a very bookish approach because I think the constitution matters a great deal. The Indian constitution in the 74th and the 73rd amendment does not use the word deconcentration and does not use the word delegation, but it uses the word devolution. So what was envisaged in the constitution was a process of devolution, which means everything that I said earlier, that devolution meant the transfer of powers and responsibilities, considerable amount of autonomy, and most of all accountability to the people. We have not in practice implemented devolution anywhere, and we are probably implementing a very strong form of deconcentration at best. And I will give you several examples of this. So having understood what democratic decentralization is, I'm narrowing that phrase down to democratic devolution, which is what is written in the constitution. I believe that it is in complete limbo. It's a dead letter. It's a non-starter. And we are declining into a much more centralized mode even as we speak. Now, why has this happened? We write brave words into our constitution and nothing gets implemented. And this is something that is so clear about, so frustrating about democracy in India, that many of our constitutional rights exist only on paper and we don't implement it at all. So I list out 5 reasons in my paper as to why this has happened. The first is there are inherent weaknesses in the 74th Amendment and the legal framework. First of all, we must remember that the constitution of a federal country like India cannot direct devolution from the national level. Our constitutional framework is that devolution is mandated in the constitution, but the nuts and bolts of how powers are devolved is a state subject. Right from 1919, the Government of India Act 1919, local government has been an item in the state list of the law. It was part of the schedule of such a schedule in the 1919 Act, in the 1935 Act, and subsequently in our Indian Constitution. It's part of the state list. So while the Constitution mandates that devolution shall happen, the extent and the modalities of devolution are left largely to the state. In my opinion, a lot of people simplistically say that this is a weakness in the constitutional amendment. I disagree. I believe that every state has got a certain democratic culture. It has got a certain urbanization or rural habitation pattern, and they must have the freedom and flexibility to decide what to devolve. In fact, I would rather have a state take only 5 or 6 functions, let us say basic functions, basic service delivery, water, health, sanitation, education, and so on and so forth, and devolve that fully, rather than do a broad devolution of everything on paper and actually not give powers and responsibilities to the local government. So I would prefer, if the trade-off is between wide devolution on paper to narrow devolution backed by pure proper devolution, I would choose the latter. I would prefer to have a narrow devolution of certain functions. But what has to be devolved has to be devolved fully with autonomy according to the rigor that I mentioned. Now, the Constitution does provide the freedom and flexibility to the states, but there are, beyond that, there are certain inherent weaknesses in the Constitution itself. The first and the most important weakness in the Constitution is, and there's a table in my paper in which I compare the 73rd with the 74th Amendment. If you are born in the rural area and at the age of 18, if you obtain a voting card and you become part of the voters list in a village, you are automatically part of the Gram Sabha. And the Gram Sabha is the body that lies at the foundation of rural participative devolution. The Panchayat is answerable to the Gram Sabhas, and I've done a bit of research to see how Gram Sabhas are empowered by various states. And I find that there is very little difference in the kind of powers that are devolved upon the Gram Sabha. So the accountability structure of the institution of the Panchayat to the Gram Sabha is very, very robust, because every individual is, by dint of having a voting ID card, a member of a Gram Sabha. We do not have the same practice in urban areas. In urban areas, the equivalent platform for people's participation is what is known as the wards committees. And I'm emphasizing on the plural, wards committees, which means that you can have a wards committee. Some diabolical bureaucrat did this at the very last minute, just added an S. Theoretically speaking, you can have one wards committee for a city like Bangalore with 200 wards plus, right? Because you can combine multiple wards and create one single wards committee. That is ridiculous. So what happens is that if you are living in a village which is going to be engulfed from a city, the day that your village is engulfed by your city, your democratic rights of participation as a voter is gone. And to my mind, this should have excited the Supreme Court, because it is unequal treatment of equal individuals. And in fact, in Bangalore, we have seen instances where some of the best panchayats which lay on the periphery of Bangalore, in fact, as there's a lovely article written about Bellandur Panchayat, which was the first panchayat in Karnataka to be computerized, and today is probably one of the worst wards of Bangalore city. A 16-member panchayat which functioned well, which had a practice where a panchayat actually televised live its Gram Sabha meetings. And I'm talking about 2000 and 2001. In that period, 25 years back, is today a ward with one corporator whose name nobody knows. So that is the decline, that there is an inherent deficiency in how people's participation is designed in urban areas. People like Katyayani have been moving heaven and earth and trying to get people's participation mechanisms fitted in. The Jawaharlal Nehru Urban Renewal Mission actually kind of produced a framework law for the state governments to implement, which created a practice of a two-tier participatory mechanism. That is, people elected the area Sabha members from the footprint of a polling booth, and those area Sabha members became members of the wards committees. But in reality, none of that happened. They passed the laws and they took the money from the government. And in my opinion, it's a bad practice to induce governments to do democratic reform by bribing them to do so, because then they will just write up the law and not implement it, and then they will go ahead and run things as usual. So that is a big problem. The other really big problem and this is I'll come to it at a later stage, which is the scary part that we are seeing, is that in spite of the mandate in the Constitution that elections to urban governments shall be held every 5 years, within the 5-year term, because what the law says is that the term of a urban government shall be 5 years and no more, which means that the election to the next term has to be completed within the 5-year term of the previous body, has been completely negated, to the extent that in Delhi, they even went to the parliament and got a law to negate the Constitution. And this is in spite of a constitutional bench decision, which actually said that the law must be implemented. It's a 5-judge constitutional bench decision. And after that, we've had postponements of the panchayats of the elections to the urban governments by some really diabolical practices, which I will come to at a later stage. Now let me come to the next level. Once you take a decision to devolve, there is a method in devolution. And this was once summed up by my former minister, Mr. Manishankar Iyer. He said the 3 Fs have to be devolved. The 3 Fs are functions, funds, and functionaries. So functions are that every local government, you cannot just say to a local government that you do health, sanitation, etc., etc., etc. These broad topics have certain tasks that are better centralized. There are certain things that are better devolved. So there is a way and a manner in which these matters have to be devolved. And that is called activity mapping. Now, nowhere in the country has this activity mapping been done. In the paper, I described what a horrendous disorganized law that we have in Karnataka, where the entire process of telling the urban government what is their responsibility is so chaotic. There are something like 500 odd responsibilities buried in the law that nobody can really implement it properly. So the process of devolution of functions is not precise in urban areas. Funding is radically bad. Let me take China as a comparison. In China, 70% of government expenditure is done by the municipality, and 9% is done by the province, that is a state, and the rest is done by the government at the top, which is around 21% or so, right? In India, states, there is a good practice of federalism in India from a fiscal perspective. But at the same time, rural and urban governments together spend, even if you count it very generously, not more than 7% of the entire government expenditure. And some of our cities are bigger than most countries. You take Bangalore city, it has a population larger than Switzerland. And Switzerland, for that size, has 26 state governments, cantons, and 5,500 communes, which are like the panchayats. That is the extent to which the intensity of government is there in Switzerland. We don't have any of that. So we do not devolve enough financial power or autonomy to the local governments. Instead, what we do is we create parallel structures. In my paper, I have actually described case studies where parallel structures were struck down as unconstitutional, because the constitution says that there is a conformity law has to be passed within 1 year of the coming into force of the constitution, which was not done. But they have been kept artificially alive because there are huge vested interests in keeping non-transparent state bodies at the local level. And if you think that the state government is a villain, no. The central government is the union government. There is nothing called a central government in India. The union government of the federal country of India is as much of a culprit in this as anybody else. Take the smart city project. It is not implemented by the municipality. It is not implemented by the state government. They have created a private limited company called Smart City Private Limited, which is injecting the money directly through a completely non-transparent and non-participative process into urban areas. So Government of India ring fences its money from being looked at by anybody else. Bureaucrats love it. Bureaucrats like this wonderful, see, the autonomy is what they get through the deconcentration. So what is happening is that the Smart City Private Limited in every city is nothing but a deconcentrated arm of the state. Tathagata here will remember a time when we had a huge argument about it. That was the last time I met Tathagata in a seminar, and there was a joint secretary of the Government of India who tried to valiantly defend it, and I say he cut a sorry figure because it is indefensible. So that is the second point, that there is a lot of fragmentation and contrary practice. The third is Sandeep did mention it in a way. He said that 5 years back when he came into this field, he did not even know what the 73rd Amendment was, and he was quite ignorant. And that is a problem. The problem is that there are so many well-meaning individuals and subgroups who wish to strengthen urban governance, and then they fool around and we actually adopt a suboptimal strategy. Bureaucrats know how to run rings around you, Sandeepan. They know how to capture you, co-opt you, and make you part of their solution, which does not involve devolution. So I have seen that every time a public interest litigation is taken up by a citizens group, the solution creates 100 other problems. Because that brings me to the next point, which is a complete, I mean, I don't know whether these words are going to get me into trouble with the judiciary, but ignorance and apathy of the judiciary. And I say it with some authority. I have been a trainer, but they will not call you a trainer. They will ask you to be a seminar participant in the National Judicial Academy, where I've done basic presentations, very basic presentations on local government to the justices of high courts, which I think are the presentation content of mine is at the level of a 7th standard or 8th standard civics textbook. And I explain some of the legal aspects of the law. And some of the judges have been nice and candid enough to come and tell me that they knew nothing about all this. So what happens is that if you go to a judge who does not understand what the constitutional amendments really mean, or what devolution is, as opposed to deconcentration, you might get a solution that is far worse than what you want. For example, the classic case is when people went to the Supreme Court and said that solid waste management is a mess and we need to create a system. And the Supreme Court just directed the district collectors to become the nodal authority and to be responsible to the court for improving solid waste management. And everybody, then the activists got up and said, hey, listen, wait, this is actually a devolved responsibility of the local government. But there was no stopping the district collectors and the deputy commissioners who used the Supreme Court directive as a way to claw back the powers from urban governments. So what happens is that sometimes the solution given by the court is through a bureaucratic process and not to the devolved power, because of the actions of well-meaning individuals who are ignorant about which level of government should do something. So finally, how are we going to change all this? And to my mind, in the rural side where I have worked a lot, we have managed to do, there's, by the way, a lot more interest and a lot more things happening on the rural side in terms of democratic devolution. For one thing, the constitution itself is stronger because it mandates that Gram Sabhas have to be created. Number two, there have been champions. There have been people from all parties. If I may mention names, one person is Mr. Manishankar, whom everybody on the right wing loves to hate, right? But the fact is that on the subject of democratic devolution, he has been a non-party champion, respected by both sides of the political divide as pushing something. But there are also some very unlikely people in this list. I must tell you about the experience of my dealing with the former chief minister of Uttar Pradesh, who was the chief minister when the Babri Masjid came down. What Singh was he? The name just slips my mind.
Kalyan Singh.
Kalyan Singh. Now, Kalyan Singh was the chairperson of the all-party committee that went into the Rural Employment Guarantee Act. The joint parliamentary committee was chaired by Kalyan Singh. I had an opportunity to work with Kalyan Singh, and Kalyan Singh made it much more panchayat friendly. And he did a lot of work during his tenure in terms of democratic devolution in Uttar Pradesh. So you do find that there are champions cutting across all parties who are interested in this process of multi-level governance and pushing powers down. But within their parties, they are completely isolated by everybody else. And bureaucrats, of course, my former tribe is, you will find a few champions, but the rest of them are opposed to this because it directly hits at their powers. They do not want to devolve. It's as simple as that, because they love the power of patronage. And even more than that, they love the nuts and bolts of manipulating fiscal transfers, moving money here and moving money there. They don't want it to be guided by an objective standard. The problem is that there is a very strong culture in us, democratic culture in us, which loves subaltern politics. We love hero worship. We love to celebrate individual champions. So everybody is competing to be the individual champion. Nobody is really bothered about collective action. There's no collegiate culture being celebrated in our political system. I mean, our news media, even the popular imagination, they try to reduce everything to the actions of a few Robin Hoods in the system, regardless of which party they belong to or which category of people they belong to. So that is a funny thing, that you will find the same law. If I take Karnataka, you have the same law, and Karnataka's rural law is actually one of the best in the country. but the way that people operate the system in, let us say, Udupi or Mangalore is radically different from how they operate the system in, let's say, Kolar, Chitradurga or Gulbarga, etc., where there is greater feudalism. So with the same legal system, you still have a different democratic culture. So you might have a democratic structure, but if the democratic culture is different, the democratic practice comes out very different. So it is these 5 things that I think have completely crippled democratic devolution as I see it today. So I do not want to leave you with the problem statement, but as far as, and I believe that this webinar will talk about solutions. I'm sure everybody will come in with solutions, but be careful. Be careful that when you are addressing the solution, you do not again go back to strengthening deconcentration and delegation, because that is not what the Constitution wants you to do. The Constitution has given you devolution. So if you are looking at amending the law or going to a court or creating a process for whatever sector in which you are working, whether it is planning, whether it is water, whether it is sanitation, whether it is disaster management, remember that the ethos of what we are doing has to fit into the constitutional framework, the constitutional vision of devolution, not deconcentration. So we really need to start at making people understand that they are individuals with a certain level of empowerment that has been envisioned for them, but which they are not grasping. And it is not merely that we should go to the first point of contact. So you could go to the corporator, but you could also go to the MP, or you could write a letter to the Prime Minister, right? That is not the way that you run a devolved system. And I think that some very basic understanding has to be created, and we need to think over it. I am sure there are very involved solutions, but those involved solutions, for example, how to untie the knot of who controls land in the city, who does spatial planning, those are technically complex and we need to think about everything. But I think much more than that is to get the spirit of devolution out. Now, let me end with by saying that 6 years, I'm from Kerala. I left Kerala at the age of 17, and I am now much more of a Kannadiga than a Malayali, but I still retain ancestral links. I have an old property in Kerala, 150 years old. After 6 years, my wife, who's from UP, and I from Kerala, we went back to Kerala. Kerala did big bang devolution, and that is really devolution. It is. I have plenty of things to say against Kerala, but Kerala is a state that actually came the closest, has come the closest to actually devolving powers. They give about 23% of their budget to the panchayats and municipalities, largely as an untied fund. There's a fair degree of autonomy for the panchayats and the municipalities to decide what they can do. And today there's a very interesting thing that I have mentioned. That's how I close my paper, that Kerala has got 950 panchayats, but according to the 2011 census, it is the fastest urbanizing state. And so around 500 of their 950 panchayats have completely lost their rural character, because less than 25% of the people living there practice agriculture. So Kerala is a very interesting state because there is such massive dispersed urbanization, but the institutions are on paper still rural, and therefore the fiscal architecture of funding is still rural. But whatever those contradictions might be, I was amazed at the quality of service delivery in Kerala. It was like, I mean, I hate to say this as an Indian, but it was like going to a foreign country. It was like going to a middle income country, like let's say Malaysia or Thailand or any of the other Asian tigers. There was very little, there was absolutely no littering. The place was spick and span, the roads were good, and there were no poor people. Kerala in 1965 had 67% poverty, the same as Bihar. Today, Kerala has 0.4% poverty. It has a lot of other problems. I'm not saying Kerala is paradise. Bihar is 51% of poor people, right? What is the difference? It could be land reforms, but you cannot escape the fact that it is democratic decentralization that has resulted in the second spurt of rapid poverty reduction in Kerala. In 1996, they did it. The state has suffered fiscal stress. They grimly continue to do the same thing. And today, If you ask anybody at the local level, they are not even bothered about the state government. For most of their problems, the first port of call is their panchayat. And though the panchayat is a rural instrument, the panchayat is providing urban services. Please go and check it out. It's not a charade. It's not a show. It's not building walls and statues and stuff like that. Their government offices are fairly dowdy, almost. I can say they're overcrowded. But things, the quality of service at the local level is much, much better. So there is, in my mind, absolutely no doubt that that is a direction in which we should go. Of course, each state has its context and each state has to improve. But if we are going to do it through deconcentration, and if you are trying to do it through delegation, and if we are going to get co-opted into the system which gives us the verbal rhetoric of decentralization, but actually implements a central process, we're not going to go very far, because we will never feel involved. We will only feel enslaved after a certain time. So I stop here. There are a lot of examples in my paper. I have not repeated everything that's in my paper. I'm sure people will read it and question it also. And I would love to be criticized. I would love my pessimism to be demolished. But I think understanding the enormity of the problem is half the solution. So I'm not going to look at the optimistic stories, the little sparks of goodness that happens in a vast country of like ours. I think the problem is a dire one, and it's getting worse by the day. Thank you very much once more.
Thank you. Let's all give a virtual applause to Mr. Raghunandan, because we don't have a live. I mean, the audience is this is a webinar format, so we can't see everyone. Thank you so much, Mr. Raghunandan. That was extremely insightful, and you have reduced all those key insights into a short summary, which is highly appreciated, because when I read your position paper, especially the 100-page one, I was so lost and I felt so overwhelmed. And your 25-page paper was much better. It was easier to handle. And for those of you who are asking for the position paper, I've shared the link in the webinar chat box about 4 times. I'll share it once more because people are repeatedly asking. We shared it on our the homepage of the SWARAJ for Cities page on INHAF, inhaf.org/SWARAJ for Cities. The position paper has been shared there. You can click through and download it. And you can please share it widely, use it as an inoculate for discussions everywhere. Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Mr. Raghunandan. And it's appropriate as we move into the panel discussion that I'll try to keep the introductions very short. 1 second. Are you able to? I have shared. It is there. It's there on the page. Who are the people who can't see it? If you browse down on the page, 1 second, there are a lot of queries asking why the page position paper is not visible. Just a second, I'll just sort this out. Ujjwala, the page is visible, right? Ujjwala, are you there?
It's available.
Can you please deal with those queries?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so yeah, the other person I forgot to thank when I introduced was Ujjwala. I mean, Ujjwala has been such a pillar of support. She's all those beautiful designs you see of the posters and the promotions, they're all done by Ujjwala. More importantly, we tend to go to her for the last moment. I think she's an amazing resource that INHAF has. Let me thank her right away before I forget. Yeah, thank you, Ujjwala, so much. And yeah, let me quickly do a round of introductions. I thank everybody in the panel for having joined us today. We're so happy to have you here. And firstly, Mr. Babu Jacob, I think Mr. Raghunandan was referring to your work when you were with the Chief Secretary of Kerala. You were the Chief Secretary of the state that Raghunandan so highly praised. And I'm sure many of the transformations happened there, partly when you were involved. And Mr. Babu, we are so fortunate to have you with us today, Mr. Babu Jacob. After Mr. Jacob retired, he's been actively involved, especially on decentralization. He's writing books. He's part of the Center for Development Studies in Trivandrum. He's doing research, and he's also doing a lot of independent research. His areas of interest are governance, public management, public administration, decentralization, and policy studies. He's co-authored a book, Governing Locally Institutions, Policies and Implementation in Indian Cities by Cambridge University Press. Currently, he's working on a book on policy progress in India. We wait with anticipation. It'll have a lot of insights. We also have Dr. Anjali Mohan with us, who is an urban and regional planner. She's a visiting faculty at of urban planning and management. She also leads a practice called integrated design, and she takes up urban planning projects as well as initiatives in the intersection of planning, participation, development, and environment. She's extensively involved in action research in Bhopal, Ranchi, Dharwad, Delhi, and Bangalore. And it involves to evolve city, region, city and neighborhood scale climate change response planning frameworks that focus on resilient and livable cities. Her professional practice experience over the last 3 straddles development, institutional and policy frameworks, urban planning, management, and information and communication technologies and development. She's a faculty at Center for Public Policy at NLS, National Law School, and also at Kautilya School of Public Policy, Geetam University, Hyderabad, and Takshashila institutions. We're so glad to have you here, madam. We also have Dr. Jeevan Kumar, who's retired from Bangalore University. He's a political scientist. He specialized in development politics and administration, Indian government and politics, and Gandhian studies. He's been a Fulbright Fellow and Fellow at Salzburg Seminar and has presented papers at international conferences. And he's edited various books. He was a professor, honorary professor in the Karnataka State Rural Development and Panchayat Raj University, and he's chairperson of Civic Bangalore. And is also managing trustee of Sarvodaya International Trust and secretary of Indian Institute of Public Administration in Karnataka, Bangalore branch. And finally, Professor Tathagata Chatterji, thank you so much for joining us. He's been a pillar of support in our organizing as well. He teaches urban management and governance at Xavier Institute of University, Bhubaneswar. He has 30 years of academic industry experience and has held senior managerial positions in the corporate sector also before shifting to academia. He's published 4 books and has over 20 quality international research publications in the areas of urban development. He received the Gerber's Award in 2016 from the International Society of City and Regional Planners for his research on comparative modes of urban governance in India. So we'll quickly move into the webinar. Today, since we also had a presentation, it's reduced our time on the webinar. I request all the panelists to please unmute yourself. So as we launch into this I'm so sorry. Actually, we've been sharing all the profiles in the chat box. I needn't have personally introduced all of you, but then it's done. This is our first webinar, so we're just getting used to the format, at least me personally. I'm so sorry. As we launch, so the webinar today is on how we handle the challenges of urban planning and governance from a perspective of, we've termed it loosely as beyond 74th Amendment. What we try to capture in that titling of the discussion is that by and large, the 74th Amendment in the last 30 years has failed to fulfill its promise, as Mr. Raghunandan has very aptly summarized. So while we do wish to, one of the best ways to get a solution is to it's to depend on the law, and when you have an anchoring law, it's a lot easier to get change influenced. So the 74th Amendment being there is an extremely useful tool. But if it has not been implemented across most of the country, then what are those challenges? What are the reasons? What are the weaknesses in the law? And potentially, what are the challenges we face in adoption and acceptance across various sections, the bureaucracy, the political class, the citizenry itself adapting in terms of culture and acceptance, and most importantly, as all of us know, governance follows money. And that has also been clearly mentioned by Mr. Raghunandan. If there is huge amount of money being generated in any sector, be it either the real economy or parallel economies, gray economies, and there's a very important sector called the political economy. If the political economy benefits a lot from a certain arrangement of things, then it's very difficult to bring about change because there's a huge vested interest. So, which is why we're saying, how do we move beyond the 74th Amendment? How do we think creatively, out of the box, and ensure that the promise of 74th Amendment, which rightly put is devolution, is achieved? And this is where we'd invite all our panelists to, since all our panelists today, the esteemed panelists, have diverse and long experience across this domain. We would love to hear from you. We'd like to start with Mr. Babu Jacob, because Mr. Babu Jacob is from the state which has ensured maximum level of devolution, and the state, of course, all of us know that Kerala has very high indicators in terms of development and local governance. I give the stage to you right now, Mr. Babu Jacob. What do you think from your experience and from the experience of your state itself, since you are a kind of a state that represents success in devolution, what would you say other states have to learn from it, the rest of India?
Yeah, thank you, Sandeep, for your introduction and for asking me to participate in this webinar. I'm glad about it. Yeah, you asked specifically about how Kerala is decentralized. But there I would depart from what Raghunandan said, and would like to say that there is very little decentralization in Kerala. Like all across India, there is no real decentralization in Kerala. I will focus on the municipal or the urban sector. It is very marginally decentralized. All the powers are exercised by the Minister of Urban Government in the state, and the Secretary to the Government, and the Under Secretary to the Government, and the Section Officer to the Government. It is like what Fessler, reputed author, has said. It's like a post office. If you go into a municipal office, you will see a lot of activity, certificates being issued or work orders being handed. But everything comes from not from that office. Almost all of it comes from the state government. So on paper, there is decentralization. Even on paper, there is not, because of the Kerala Municipality Act 1994. Although the law, if you read, looks like giving certain functions, authority, and power, but it makes provision for rule making under the law for various matters, extensive, and these are all made by non-elected people, and who either don't understand or they may not be interested in pursuing the real intent of the policy. And therefore, ultimately, you get a number of rules which constrain completely the authority that the law gives. Like, for instance, even repair of a road minor road in a municipality, even city corporation of Trivandrum, where I live, whether it has to be a 20 mm chipping carpet or 40 mm chipping carpet, they'll have to write to the government and ask. And if the contract exceeds, say, the estimated amount, then they have to write to the government, can we do that? If a lamppost is to be replaced, they will have to write to the Kerala State Electricity Board. With the result that street lighting is ineffective, roads are not maintained, and most of the municipal activities are in very bad shape. And the municipal elected body, the mayor and the council, does not have any authority to discharge it. This is a situation all across India, but it's different in Gujarat. This is based on the research I had done. And there is a reason also. In Gujarat, if you go to Surat, I compared the performance of Surat and Thiruvananthapuram. Surat has almost near good, complete autonomy. And Trivandrum has nearly no autonomy. We'll have to, when we talk about decentralization, when you are emphasizing on the 74th Amendment as the cornerstone, as you put it, of this discussion. Right, I understand that one, because that was a turning point. It was supposed to be a turning point. But if you look a little back into history, why the 74th Amendment and the talk about it came? Because we could not do decentralization in our earlier attempts. 1957, Balwant Mehta Committee proposed that is mostly for rural areas, but we don't have any separate bodies which have gone into urban particularly. So we can take it as decentralization, whether it's rural or urban. Balwant Mehta Committee went in and studied in with great importance. Yes, democracy should go down to the people. People should take decisions locally. They should decide what they want and be able to implement their decisions locally without being interfered with or being directed against by a higher government. And in India, in fact, if you look into history, most of the panchayats were formed following Balwant Mehta Committee report, but they were found to be toothless. They did not function effectively. So later, in 1988, 20 years later, Ashok Mehta Committee went into it. Mr. Ashok Mehta and the committee members also went into the same mental framework as Balwant Mehta did, saying that it is highly important, it's not working, we should make it all right. But the situation did not change. It was in that context that Rajiv Gandhi took a number of meetings with the municipal leaders. I think the first time a prime minister at the level of the prime minister doing that to find out what is going on, why is it not happening? And I was reading through some of his speeches, even while preparing for this one. In a Jaipur meeting, he said that people should do their things locally. And you should examine why we are not able to do it. And they should make their own plan. Planning, he means their own, what they want to do. And he added, there's much more that to be done than mere planning, but implementation. It should happen locally. What do we do for that? This was the question he raised. And while introducing the Constitutional Amendment Bill, in fact, 74th bill originally came as 64th bill or so, I think 64th. And that was introduced by Rajiv Gandhi himself. While introducing that, he said, why is it that a local flooding in a municipality cannot be solved by that municipality, but goes to the state minister, it often goes to the chief minister, and even sometimes it goes to the prime minister. This was introductory bill introducing speech in the parliament. I saw it in the parliamentary proceedings, it is there. This should change. They should be able to locally decide and locally implement. And we should do. And this 74th Amendment is for that purpose. But where we failed is that, disconnect between intent and implementation. This is a big problem in India for many things, but a classic example is decentralization as policy. So currently, I am working on that in a greater detail. The book that you mentioned that I am trying to write now is on that one. Why is it that it so happens? So in policy science literature, Laswell, the father of policy science, he said that There are two things. One is knowledge for policy, and then knowledge of policy. The knowledge for policy, you should know what is the problem definition. So in this case, in the 74th Amendment, the problem was not defined. As I said, Ashok Mehta, and before that Balwant Rai Mehta, and even pre-independent also we had panchayats. In fact, Tamil Nadu had about, I think, 1/3 of the area was covered by panchayats. And many other states also had panchayats. The Britishers had also pushed a little, especially after the Ripon resolution and all that, which is part of history. But after Balwant Rai Mehta report, a large part of the country had been covered by panchayats, but they did not function well, and it was actually taken as absolutely ineffective. So what was the problem? The problem definition was absent. In a way, Rajiv Gandhi defined the problem well. He pointed to the problem well. The people should govern locally. They should take decisions about what they want, and they should be able to implement that decision locally without any external this thing. That means capability, that is capacity, autonomy. These things were built into his arguments, but they were not studied or looked upon as such, not understood. There was no knowledge developed. So a committee of people, in Britain they call it bill team. There was a drafting group in the Prime Minister's office with some 3 or 4 or 5 secretaries. Secretary to Prime Minister, Secretary Rural Development, Secretary Urban Development, Secretary Law, and Secretary Legislation. They sit together and make this. They never talk to any municipal chairman or Rajiv Gandhi himself did it. And the effort is consequent on his own, wanting to have a policy. But the policy drafters, in fact, there is a lot of studies on this one, that ultimately policy is drafted by the bureaucracy. And the bureau and legislation particularly is at the mercy of bureaucracy virtually. The idea comes from the politician, but the bureaucracy, the way Indian policy process works. And most of the time...
Mr. Babu Jacob.
Yes.
Actually, you've given some key inputs. One is that you disagree that Kerala has a high amount of decentralization. The way you describe it is that just as Mr. Raghunandan said, there's a lot of, it's not devolution, it's what he called delegation and deconcentration. That's exactly what's happening there. But for some strange reason, Kerala, it seems to be working well enough for him to have been happy when he visited it. That's the drift I got. So there could be possibly be other reasons for why it's working well. The service delivery, it's not essentially devolution. But from whatever I've read widely, political interaction is much higher in Kerala at the grassroots level. So it could possibly be a different reason why it works well.
Even political interaction is very poor at the local level.
No, but if you take the question to the political scientist, Dr. Jeevan, are you there? Dr. Jeevan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. So what I gathered from both Mr. Raghunandan as well as Mr. Babu Jacob, while they were largely explaining that the service delivery is better in Kerala, but actual devolution is not there. But Mr. Babu Jacob has gone into great detail to explain that in the 74th Amendment itself, the problem definition is not there. It's basically a policy, and that's exactly what Mr. Raghunandan also explained. So what would you recommend here as a way forward? Is there a need to amend the 74th Amendment to make a better law?
Sandeep, are you asking me to make my presentation too after answering this particular question, or do I just respond?
There's no presentation, sir. This is purely a panel discussion. I'm sorry if we have misconveyed. I'm very sorry.
Okay, no problem.
But I give you the opportunity to see this. What Mr. Raghunandan presented was the first in the series of many position papers. So we welcome you to make another position paper on this topic. And as Mr. Raghunandan presented, you will be given a chance to present. But today you're here as a panelist, so it'll be free-flowing questions with views from each panelist. I'm so sorry if we had misconveyed.
No problem. No problem. So I have a few things to say at this point of time.
Yeah.
The specific question you asked is whether something is wrong with the 74th Amendment itself and whether we need to go back to the drawing board. The answer would be yes. The answer would also be no, because to a large extent, I think whatever needs to be conveyed is already there in the 74th Amendment. We need to go back to the drawing board to look at certain aspects. I'll come to that in a little while. What I think the problem lies elsewhere, according to me. And this is where I would like to say a few things. One, are we clear about the core principles that underpin democratic decentralization? To a large extent, the 74th Amendment takes care of these core principles. And there are 6 of these principles which we need to keep in mind. The first is that of subsidiarity. The second is democratic decentralization itself. The third is delineation of functions. Fourth is devolution in real terms. Fifth is convergence. And the sixth is citizen centricity. To a large extent, I find all of this on paper in the 74th Constitutional Amendment. Things here and there as they're being implemented by state governments, because they have to form their own laws in conformity with the 74th Amendment. By and large, state laws also seem to be in conformity, but there is a basic problem, and I'll spend a couple of minutes dealing with this. And this is where I'm asking this question: does local government enjoy sovereignty? We in political science have been looking at this issue for quite some time, and most of us seem to agree on this particular point, that local governments in India do not enjoy sovereignty, despite the passage of the 74th Constitutional, 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendments. I'll clarify this in a little while. They are not sovereign. If you look at the way states, if you go back to the social contract theory itself and see how the modern state came into being, it's a victory of centralism over localism, and the centralist paradigm derives its legitimacy largely from this contractualist political philosophy based on the social contract. Therefore, local governments, particularly in India, which are supposed to derive their legitimacy from below, legally draw its authority de facto from the top. So there's a big problem here, and this is where many of us seem to agree that the local governments themselves, whether they're rural or urban, despite the passage of these 2 landmark constitutional amendments, are not sovereign entities, because if they are creatures of state governments, they're created by the state governments, and then even after the 5-year term, if they still continue to be in limbo, the fact is that they are creatures of state governments. The fact is that their existence depends on the state governments, and therefore they are not sovereign entities. So there's a huge problem here which we should look at, and in political science we've been looking at this. The third point that I'm making here is about citizen engagement. Now, I agree with what Mr. Raghunandan said, that is a problem with the way in which we are doing local government, and perhaps we need to go back to the drawing board to redesign the way in which we are doing or implementing local government, the way we are doing local governance. And a point that he was making is if we have made a mess of the whole thing, if urban democratic decentralization is tamed, it's listless, spiraling decline, and so on. One point perhaps which we need to look at is, do we need to go back to the drawing board? Do we need to redraw the whole arrangement so that devolution becomes very clear, and in the state and enabling legislation, the dimensions of devolution are made very clear? Okay, do we need to do that or not? I'm not very sure, but that's at one level where we need to go beyond the 74th Constitutional Amendment, and that's the focus of the series of webinars. At macro level, at the meso level, and at micro levels, we need to do something, and this is where I think citizen engagement is required for transforming urban governance. I've done some reflection on citizen engagement, and if you look at literature on the subject also, and Civic also is doing quite a lot of it, thanks to Katyani Chamraj. I think the way out of this particular mess, while we wait for things to be clarified at the macro and meso levels, I think the need of the hour right now is to do citizen engagement And studies across the country are telling us that across the three broad types of citizen engagement, whether it is overseeing the state as it conducts public affairs, whether it's in terms of bridging the gap between social and political accountability mechanisms, or whether it is in terms of facilitating opportunities for civil society actors to interface with state actors. And this has been happening through community scorecards, through citizen report cards, through community-based monitoring, and so on. So I think the writing on the wall is very clear. There may be problems with the amendment itself. There may be problems with the way in which state governments are implementing or doing justice to the amendment. There may be ways in which there is elite capture. There are ways in which bureaucratic capture is also happening. So there are a lot of problems that need addressing. One is not very sure how this can be done. Reform measures are required at multiple levels. But I think while one is contemplating on how we can improve things at the macro and meso levels, my argument today is if we look at citizen engagement across the country and we see a lot of good things happening there, we need to convert the citizen. Citizen engagement to me teaches us to become involved citizens rather than demanding customers. This is my response for now, Sandeep. Back to you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeevan. Actually, that corresponds with our own experiences here. Like whatever little ward committee formation has happened in Bengaluru, especially, whichever ward citizens have started getting involved with, we're developing a huge amount of political influence. I wouldn't call it political influence. We have a certain amount of influence over bureaucracy, over demand, over services and stuff like that. It is the tip of the iceberg, but we have tasted blood and we know what actual devolution can be. So, and I'd like to take this question across to Professor Tathagat. Say, building that demand, both the citizen demand as well as the political demand for true devolution, from your exposure and experience, how do you see that, how it can be built, and how do you see that happening in the future?
Yes, thank you, Sandeep ji, and thank you, Kirti ji, for having me here. This is really a very fascinating area of discussion. Now, coming to this issue of, how the citizen engagement happens, or, we need to look at, there are, all different states in India are having different types of political culture. And, the 74th Amendment has got a broad template, but how it unfolds varies very much from state to state. And and even within the state, there are variations from big city to small city. So, coming to the bigger question, addressing, the nitty-gritties in the 74th Amendment, of course, we can definitely go back to the drawing board and fix some of the points being raised about ward committee. But, as you know, in case of Bangalore, there is some ward committee functions are going on, but most of the Indian cities, the ward committee does not function. There is very little functioning of the ward committee in many cities. Now, I would, as someone coming from Eastern India, I would like to flag two different kind of scenarios from two different ends of devolution spectrum. One is that, in Odisha, we see, there is a new kind of citizen engagement that is happening, where there is a new model of fourth tier public participation is emerging. But it is a form of a kind of a depoliticized participation, leading to what Raghuji in his paper has termed as agentification of the municipal bodies. As you know, in Odisha has introduced a Jaga Mission, which is a act to provide land rights to all the slum dwellers in the state across 114 urban local bodies in the state. And these are being upgraded to through active involvement of forming slum dwellers associations. So slum dwellers associations are like resident welfare associations, and they are being given a lot of support. And although the ward office is acting here as a kind of a coordination role, but most of the work in reality are being done by the consulting firms and the big NGOs, some of the big NGOs and consulting firms. So ward office is here acting just as a real estate space for the consulting activities happening there, and they are taking their cues from the state government, and the state governments really running this process of empowerment of the fourth tier entity, that is Slum Dwellers Association. And in the entire process, the role of the urban local body and the elected municipal councillors is practically non-existent, or that of the ward council, it is practically non-existent. And again, I mean, there is one issue that the 74th Amendment speaks about ward committees to be constituted in cities having minimum 3 lakh population. But the point is, in Odisha, the urban local bodies are very small in size. So there are very few urban local bodies which are more than 3 lakh in population. So the ward committee in those cases are not there. And so the scope for participation, it is happening only as a kind of a infrastructure delivery. I mean, the state is, the relationship between the state and the citizenship, it is that of it is a very, I mean, it is becoming a kind of a exchange relationship, that is, I mean, the delivery of the infrastructure. But the role of the urban local body as a space for political participation is practically, has got extremely diluted. The second example that I would like to flag is that from Calcutta, my native city. Now, I mean, the Calcutta Municipal Corporation Act, that is comparatively more robust compared to most other big city municipal corporations. And there is a mayoral council system, which is like a cabinet type government at a city level, where there are council members who hold different positions like water, education, sanitation, etc. And also, unlike say Delhi, Mumbai, or Bangalore, where the role of the mayor is mostly ornamental and no one really knows who the mayor is, the mayor of Calcutta has always been a well-known leader, and people who also vote enthusiastically in the corporation elections. And if I remember, in the last election, the voting was somewhere around 80%. But what is happening? Since 2006, this act came into being when the earlier left front government was in power. But since 2016, what we are seeing is a strange situation where the serving mayor is simultaneously acting as a state government minister as well. First, it was Jeevan Chatterji, and now it is Firhad Hakim. The present mayor is also the transport minister of West Bengal. He also happens to be the vice chairman of the Calcutta Metropolitan Development Authority. And this Metropolitan Development Authority includes 3 municipal corporations and 23 municipalities. So there are serious questions about the institutional boundaries in a federal system. Now, it is somewhat like, I mean, state cabinet minister simultaneously being also a state chief minister is also simultaneously being a central minister. I mean, so the level of federalism between the state government and the center is very well defined in Indian Constitution. But I mean, we don't really have a constituent assembly for the devolution from the state to the city level. So, I mean, this requires a very, very wider range of debates, because ultimately, the point that Dr. Raghunandan made, and also the point Mr. Babu Jacob also made, the two very interesting things is that, I mean, the Central Act cannot be implemented across India in a similar manner. There has to be, state-wise variation because the political culture of the states varies so much. And also another point that Mr. Babu Jacob mentioned, that, you can have a lot of devolution on paper, but within that, the nitty-gritties may not be devolved. So there are aspects which could be devolved in paper, but in reality, the strings are being still pulled by the state government. Now, here I have another point. That is really devolution across the state, across the cities really feasible in Indian context? Now, here is a problem with the 74th, because 74th is kind of a shadow of the 73rd Amendment. The point is, in rural areas, the population sizes are small. But whereas in urban areas, we have cities which may be as small as 5,000 population to cities which have 5 million population. How can we have a same lens to look at the cities of all these different scales and complexities? So we need to think about having devolution in a graded manner. And perhaps, it is under the present circumstances, it is almost impossible to think that any state government in India would really devolve power in the primate city of the state. No chief minister of Karnataka would devolve power of Bangalore over Bangalore, or Maharashtra that of over Mumbai. So I think we need to start about the issue of devolution, if it is at all happens, in the smaller towns, smaller areas, where, another very interesting point that Mr. Raghunandan made in his paper is that when a rural panchayat gets transferred to a city, the people instantly lose their democratic rights of participation. So perhaps, when we think about devolution, as India is fast moving towards urban, so we need to think about devolution from the grassroots level. We need to first devolve power in the smaller levels of towns and cities, rather than, our thought when we are discussing 74 is always clouded by the metro cities. So instead of thinking about metro cities, we need to think about the devolution to smaller towns, maybe tier 2, tier 3, tier 4 towns. And those could be more amenable.
Sir, but the point what Mr. Raghunandan made is that decentralization is already working well in the rural areas. It's the cities that have a challenge. So in the interest of time, because we've already 1.5 hours into the event, and there might be fatigue among the audience. So I'd quickly like to round it up with just one question. See, when it comes to urban areas, the greatest challenges that people face are one is about planning itself, because growth happens very rapidly in urban areas. So the greatest challenges are the planning function. And that is what is being completely neglected, because metropolitan planning committees and master planning are largely neglected. And the second largest challenge that cities face and urban areas face is that of, essentially, it's about mobility. Basically, the greatest challenge in a city, apart from, of course, other services, is about roads, is about mass transit, is about all of that. And this is where almost all cities in India seem to be broken. There is no metropolitan planning committees, there's no master planning. And if there is master planning, it's done without the prescribed process. And the transport function or the mobility function is essentially a part of master planning, but you have cities which form a different agency to actually do that separately, and there's a whole lot of mess happening there. Now, how do we clean up this aspect of planning? And see, because the 74th Amendment exists on paper, anything that the states do today, because you have a largely more aware citizenry, can be challenged in courts. So as a result, what happens? The states go around doing things without due process. Citizens go around blocking that because it doesn't follow due process. And the cities are suffering with unplanned growth, and they're becoming just a mess. So this is open to all panelists. After that, if there are any questions from the audience, we can take. Unfortunately, Anjali had to leave because she had an urgent commitment to meet. We hope to bring her back, and also today being the first event, we haven't controlled time properly. We hope to get that correct in the next event onwards. We will hopefully have Anjali back. Yes, would any of you love to deal with this question of urban planning and mobility planning? This will be a last question from the panel itself. But after that, if anybody from the audience wishes to have questions raised, we can answer them. I don't see any questions in Q&A.
Just to give a short answer, under the 74th planning needs to be devolved from the development authorities to the municipal bodies. Now, in most cases, that devolution itself has not happened. One question here is about devolution of planning from the development authority to the local bodies. The second issue comes to the question of planning capacity itself. The state level planning capacity in most cases is extremely weak. As you know, recently Niti Aayog has formed a committee to focus on improvement in planning capacity. I would give you the example of the state of Odisha. The state of Odisha, in the state system, there are hardly 12 or 13 urban planners across the state. So these 12 and 13, and there are 114 urban local bodies. So, and the state urban development department, SUDA, State Urban Development Authority, is in charge of planning for different urban local bodies. But the planning also, planning actually essentially happens from the state capital, not in the specific urban local bodies. And also, most of the urban planning activities are now getting contracted out to the consultants, and most of the funds that is available for infrastructure development, etc., like smart cities, like Amrut, like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, the planning for these programs, which are the major instruments for funding infrastructure, are devolved to the consultants. So we are having a kind of what is called a consultocracy coming up, and the state bureaucracy is also quite happy with the system, because the consultants can be much more easily controlled compared to state town planning departments. So state town planning departments are also very weak. So it is a very longer question that, doing planning. So we need to build planning capacity. Also, we need to devolve planning to the urban local bodies, and also people needs to be sensitized about the role of planning itself.
Yeah. Can we take a question to others as well? Yeah.
Sandeep, if you don't mind, I'd like to say a couple of things here. Number one, it's very difficult not to compare and contrast the 73rd with the 74th Constitutional Amendment. And since I'm teaching in a rural development university, and we have, in our classrooms, we have panchayat development officers and so on. We send our students to the field and so on. So the quick point is decentralized planning in terms of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment is happening fairly well in Karnataka. There are mechanisms whereby, through the Gram Sabhas, what is it that you actually require and so on. They slowly come upward, and then decisions are taken at slightly higher levels. They may not be working very well, I would agree. But then when we teach decentralized planning, we always refer to Kerala and say, here is the one state where they're doing such an excellent job of doing decentralized planning. And since Kerala, from rural to urban, the transition is also happening. We still seem to romanticize Kerala in terms of decentralized planning. To what extent that can be replicated in other cities, I'm not very sure. But then since we have Mr. Jacob here, perhaps he would also like to respond to this question.
But he disagrees with the notion. He disagrees with the notion that there is decentralization in Kerala.
In Kerala, I will add a little on. In Kerala also, it's only decentralized planning, no decentralized implementation.
Oh, I see. That's a very interesting.
They will get together and make a plan. But who looks at the plan? Nobody. Do they have the power to implement the plan? No, because there is no decentralization.
Can I
Therefore,
just come in here?
so that is why we are projecting decentralized planning. We never say decentralized implementation, because implementation, every order has to be taken from the state government. Therefore, decentralized planning is also on the books only. And adding to what Tathagata said, I largely agree with him. Sandeep, your basic point on this was urban planning. There is no arrangement for urban planning in the governance of the country, because urban, there is no government in the urban. If you call urban is not only a corporation. It is surrounded by some municipalities. It is surrounded some villages which are becoming towns. They may be already census towns. Some may be shortly becoming census towns. Each has its own arrangement. A census town has a town panchayat. Some of the villages which are shortly already becoming urbanized, having a panchayat. A municipality having, the municipal area having municipality. City corporation having a corporate body. And these are all independent governments. And there is central government which is implementing most of the major things, like metro or a bigger thing, big telecommunication or big national highway improvement program. And the state government has a number of schemes operating over. So there are a host of governments working over, implementing over. And there has to be a coordinating government, which I would think would be the elected city corporation government, which can coordinate with the other governments in the local governments in the urban region, and also with the central and the state governments as far as implementation of their schemes are concerned smoothly in the city. But because the central main government within the city government is not empowered, is not autonomous, is totally dependent on the state government, because there is no decentralization, there is no scope for, no space for their own decision making in the overall affairs of the city. And even though urban planning is on paper under Schedule 2 of the Constitution given to them, it's not with them. And even if it is with them on paper, they don't have any machinery. Second point would be that across India, there is no knowledge of urban planning. How to make a plan. So you will see, you look at Tirunelveli plan or Bangalore plan or Chandigarh plan, they are all just technical documents, highly technocratic documents. They have no implementation or strategization for doing what they want to do. They say should be done. There's no strategization, which again is an exception in Gujarat. If you go to Surat and all, their plan is based on transportation linked and service provision linked. How can electricity be reached? How can power be reached? How can water be reached? How can drainage arrangements be reached? And how the whole system will relate in relation to the transportation network. This kind of sense of planning is absent in Indian cities, which is a big, our planning departments, urban planning departments across the country are manned by engineers. They have no sense of urban planning. They don't get the sense of urban planning, which is a multi-dimensional, multi-disciplinary kind of a activity. So these are the two reasons I would say that. The first one, the fragmented nature of a government. There's nobody in charge of the city or the urban. And secondly, we have no knowledge of urban planning in India. I would put
Great,
these
sir.
as the argument.
Summarize it pretty well, and you actually
Thank
brought
you.
one
That's a good
essential
point.
aspect, which is peri-urban areas. Peri-urban areas which are urban, between rural and urban, and fast urbanizing. And as you rightly put it, it goes through this.
I've got a few points.
Yeah.
May I
So
respond?
who's that, Mr. Raghunandan?
That is me. Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Raghunandan is actually coming to you
can
because I was coming to you finally because we are running out of time also, and I wanted you to end it. So basically, yeah, the questions I wanted to, I mean, obviously you have your own points, and I think there's only one question in the Q&A, and this is great to have all of the discussions, but how can we overcome this? Why are we failing to implement it? But I'd still like to actually, it's unfortunate Anjali left the panel because she had to rush off, and she was the only planner in our midst.
Yeah.
And
Right.
this question was actually targeted.
Could I actually she should have been.
Yeah, but it's okay. We will bring her in one of the forthcoming events with a specific focus on planning. hopefully we'll get more answers. And today was a general session anyway, and in our future sessions, we'll deep dive into various aspects. So, Mr. Raghunandan, to bring up the conclusion, what do you think, especially the planning bit? Because see, Bangalore is suffering most because of unplanned growth, and the Supreme Court itself has advised all other cities in India don't follow the Bangalore model, because Bangalore is a product of unplanned growth. How do we overcome this? How do we ensure governments comply with constitutionality and with 74th Amendment? And I mean, how can it get better than what it is? And we'll hopefully end with your comments.
Yeah, the first point is that again, the word plan, like the word decentralization, is often stretched to mean many things. But one of the big mistakes that we make, or there's a conceptual confusion that we make, is when we speak of a plan in a rural context, we actually mean a budget, not a plan. When we say participatory planning in a rural area, it is all about this much money will go to health, this much will be for education, etc., which is not a plan. It's a budget. A budget is a subset of a plan, right? And when we talk about planning in an urban area, we are talking about spatial planning. So what we have is rural areas doing budgeting without any spatial planning, and urban areas supposed to be doing spatial planning. And there I agree with Mr. Babu Jacob completely. The entire framework of urban planning processes are as old as the 1930s. The Town and Country Planning Acts of the country are unchanged since the early 30s, when cities began to grow and we started doing spatial planning, and they all should have been amended the day that the 74th Amendment was passed. One of the greatest failures, and I've written that in the paper also, is that the 73rd Amendment actually came out with a very revolutionary clause in Article 243 ZE, and I think ZF. ZE is District Planning Committee and ZF is the Metropolitan Planning Committee. The 74th Amendment actually stitched together budgeting and spatial planning together in an institution called the Metropolitan Planning Committee. And what should have happened is that all the fragmented processes of spatial planning and local budgeting, which were prior to the 74th Amendment, should have all been abolished or integrated with the MPC. We have not had that happening. And the reason is that, I mean, I have to say this about the courts, that there is a judgment of the Supreme Court which actually says that it is okay to continue a pre-74th Amendment body, such as the Bangalore Development Authority, which is implementing a law prior to the 74th Amendment. The Supreme Court says no. The clause in Article 243N, if I am not mistaken, which says that within 1 year of the coming into force of the amendment, all laws that are any provision of any law that is in violation of the mandate of the 74th Amendment will ipso facto remain, will become invalidated. The Supreme Court actually did not apply that clause, and it legitimized the continuation of the BDA. Right. So today, let us take Bangalore. There used to be one BDA. Now there are 16 independent planning authorities in the Bangalore metropolitan area. There has been a High Court judgment saying that the Metropolitan Planning Committee shall be constituted, and it has been constituted. They meet for chai and biscuit. And every other parallel institution for planning, for fragmented planning, is continuing with impunity because the courts have legitimized it and says that this is not in contradiction with the 74th Amendment. So that is as far as Kerala is concerned, as Karnataka is concerned. In Kerala also, I completely agree with Mr. Babu Jacob that the system of spatial planning is antiquated. Kerala, with all its rejigging of the fiscal system to give 22% of the money to the panchayats, and well, to a large extent, I have noticed many of the disturbing things that he has talked about, decentralized planning being gradually centralized. But still, Kerala, I think, is comparative in a much better situation because it actually has walked the talk. It used to say it gave 30%, but it hasn't been 30%. It has come down to 22%, and there's a large amount of autonomy in the budgetary allocations to the panchayats, and they have flexibility. But as far as spatial planning is concerned, Kerala is again dealing with the problems of dispersed urbanization with instruments country planning acts. Now, the funny thing is, if you walk into any urban development department in any state and go to the town and country planning officers and ask them about what they understand about the 74th Amendment, you will draw a big blank. I mean, these guys are living in a time warp. They just do not understand. They do not even know what is the 74th Amendment. And that is the big dichotomy. I also agree that we really don't have the conceptual clarity to unravel this mess of institutions fooling around in the process of planning. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. That is the reason why we are having urban sprawls. That is the reason why Kerala's floods hit people so badly, because there has been low density urbanization across the state, right? Waterways have been blocked. Everything is very random. So that is, I did not talk about that here because that itself deserves a complete webinar to itself. How do you unravel and clean up? And Anjali would be the right person to do that. So there are, I described the big problem. It is pessimistic. There are sparks of good things here. I tried to draw out one which I believe is still valid as far as Kerala is concerned, but I am in synchrony with what Mr. Babu Jacob says, because Malayalis complain all the time, and I'm very happy that they complain, because it could be a lot better. It could be a lot better. But if you come from Bangalore, which is completely dysfunctional, and you go to Kerala and you see, you get a sense. And one of Mr. Abrol said that opinions are not, right. I mean, that's fine. I mean, I stand back and say that that's my personal opinion, so it can be contested. But there are certain very good features about Kerala's decentralized fiscal architecture. And as far as spatial planning is concerned, Kerala is just about as bad as every other state, which persists with almost a century-old system of town and country planning that we inherited from the British.
Fantastic, sir. I think you summarized it all. And this is our event is exceeded 1.5 hours. I think we should wind it up now. But I need to thank every one of you for having made time, and you've been on our debut webinar. That makes you all very special, and it's made our event also very special to have you all with us. And I thank all the members of the audience who attended. The recording of this webinar will be up on the INHAF Rethinking Cities page, which we'll share. And if you've registered, you'll probably get a follow-up mail on that. And as every one of the panelists, you have brought up very specific, interesting issues, which I think we will be deep diving into in the future webinars that are coming up. Possibly, I'm seeing that maybe we'll possibly have to do a fortnightly webinar to address every issue that we are talking of. And we hope you can join us in those deep diving sessions also on each of those individual topics, which you might love to be part of. And we also invite you all to potentially contribute what do you call a position paper of your own on any aspect of urban planning or governance that you would like to focus on, or if you'd like to offer articles of your own, those also, because we are going to be compiling a book at the end of the season on this topic. So we hope to keep continuing this engagement and discussion with all of you and with all of the audience. And we hope to drive some action, and there are a lot of interesting points that you're bringing up. We'd love to do some sort of engagement publicly with citizens on these issues. We'll keep you updated on all of these. Thank you so much to all of you for having come. Thank you, Kirti Bhai, he's not here right now. And thank you, Ujjwala, for all the support you have been providing and for all the brilliant creative work that you've brought into this series. And thanks everybody, and thanks to all the partners, to Civic, to Praja Foundation, to Building Better Gurgaon, INHAF and Citizens Agenda for Bengaluru and all their members. Thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Hope to see
Sandeep.
you all
Thank
soon
you.
again. Thanks.
Thank you.